Last year was the 20th anniversary.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of interviews about it, and I got to think about and practice talking about that. And here's what I found as I was reflecting back on it. There were sort of three separate threads or arrows that came together at that time. And the first one was the patterns movement. So I wasn't in the early days of the patterns movement. That was like 1991, 2, 3. Design Patterns book came out. And I went to the first patterns workshop that I went to was in 1995. Went to 1995, and then I went to 1996, and then in Europe there was one in 97, 98, and so on. The reason that's important is because there was a style of dialogue that evolved inside that community that was important at the time at the writing of the manifesto. Mm-hmm. It was very much holistic, social, very careful, a lot of credit to each speaker, right? It was mm-hmm. quite a gentle group. Mm-hmm. And we all practiced talking together. Well, inside the manifesto meeting, I was there, Martin Fowler was there, Ward Cunningham was one of the founders of one of these things, Kent Beck was one of the founders of one of these things. I don't know who else was in the patterns movement, but that's a strong, so we all brought that culture, all of those conversations and that style of dialoguing and style of having a meeting mm-hmm. was there. Second one is not known. There was a guy called John Hopkins, Jon Hopkins. And in 1993, 4, 5, he had some meetings at Snowbird in Salt Lake City. And I literally moved to Salt Lake City just before one of them. And I knew Ward Cunningham. And I said, hey, it's just up the mountain right there. Can I come and gate crash and be in the meeting? And he said, sure. And that was in 94. And the style of the meeting was that we just said, hey, who has any topics? Mm-hmm. And we did like a 9 a.m. till 1 p.m. or till 8 to 12 or whatever. Had a lunch and we went skiing till 4:30, and then we had a meeting 5 to 7, and then we had dinner. Mm-hmm. And that was the structure of the day. So we had like this informal discussion in a room, and then talk to each other and go skiing, and then talk to each other some more for 2 days. And that again was the structure we used for the manifesto meeting. So that's the second mm-hmm. one. And guess who was there? Martin Fowler was there, Ward Cunningham was there, Kent Beck was there, I was there. So we have these threads, and then you've got the part people know about, which is the methodologies, right? So I came up with my stuff around 1992, 3, 4. Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland and Mike Beadle was in there. And we had DSDM that came from England mm-hmm. and Holland, and FTD that came from Australia, mm-hmm. And the pragmatic programmers were there. So in the late 90s, there was this kind of and you'll notice there's an overlap in the communities, right? Mm-hmm. So we have the same people showing up, and some people like Jutta Eckstein, who's in Germany, was in the patterns, but not in the methodology. So there's this crisscross of communities, and this is very important because this sets the social context, right? Mm-hmm. So then Bob Martin, so I was literally going to organize the next workshop on OO design at Snowbird in February of 2001. Mm-hmm. And why February? Because the second week of February, it always has a lot of snow. And we always would have the first day, then it would snow, they'd close the roads, and then we had the next day of skiing alone on the mountain. So if you ever go to Utah, the middle of February is the time to go. It always dumps snow. So I was going to organize this. And then Bob Martin sent out an email, and maybe he was with Martin Fowler, I don't know, and said, hey, there are a bunch of us that sound alike. We're doing kind of something similar. I think we should get together. I want to write a manifesto. Mm-hmm. Now, here's why you should never ask me to predict the future. I thought that was the stupidest idea ever. So never ask me to predict the future. If you look at my performance in the stock market, it says, don't follow me. And if you look at my predictions about technology and manifestos, it says, don't listen to any predictions about the future. So my job is to find out what people do now, and I will tell you what people do now. I can't predict nothing about the future. So the point being, then he said, I want to write a manifesto. He had an invitation list, and he wanted to meet in Chicago in February when the wind is very, 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 very cold coming off the lake. And Jim Highsmith and I were in Salt Lake City, and we said, well, no. we'll do it at Snowbird, because I was already organizing it. So I basically took over the organizing, and then we had all the people who showed up, and then Bob Martin started off the day and said, I think that there's something common here, let's write a manifesto. We set up the structure like the wood conferences with the morning and the skiing in the afternoon, right? 2 days like that. And I remember it's like, so then he sat down. Mm-hmm. And we have 17 people and we're sitting in a circle like this. And the hardest part of 17 people who don't know each other is how do you make the agenda? How do you make the first decision how we're going to run the day? Because some of us had been in wood, but some people didn't know each other. Arie van Bennekom literally flew over from the Netherlands for 2 days and then flew back. So besides jet lag, he didn't know anybody. He didn't know what XP was, right? So we had people who had never met. I'd never met Jeff Sutherland. So this is a scary moment because now you can have a lot of fighting. And now we get to the magic of that meeting that people don't recognize because they say 17 white men with big egos, right? How could you ever have done anything? But the listening, the generosity that was in that room was incredible, Stephen Meller was there. Now, Stephen Meller was, for many of us, the arch enemy of all methodologies because he had a very paper-centric methodology that many of us, literally hated, okay? And he showed up, and we're introducing each other, and we're looking at Stephen Meller like, who invited Stephen Meller? What is he doing? Like, we're all like this. And he has the best sense of humor. And he goes, hi, I'm Stephen Meller. I'm a spy. And we just went like, this guy just said it out loud, right? Wow. But nobody criticized him ever, right? And there was one time I remember when Ron Jeffries and I were talking to him and going, he said, I want to do these drawings and stuff. And we said, yeah, but then you have to go and maintain the code. The drawings are only one. He said, no. When I get done, you'll maintain the drawings. So we said, oh, the source language is a mixture of drawings and text. And he says, yeah, it's the source language. And we go, well, I don't care what the source language is. I can do source languages in drawings and text. That's not a problem. As long as I maintain it in drawings and text, I don't shift over. Suddenly, we were all on the same side of the table. Like, we didn't think he could finish his research objective, but we didn't have any objections. Mm-hmm. So suddenly but you see imagine that kind of dialogue never happens. So we're sitting in the big round and somebody says, so how do we make an agenda? And somebody who was an XP person, obviously, and probably one of the patterns people, pulls out an index card out of his pocket because all extreme programming people walked around with index cards in their pockets at the time. You always had index cards. Pulls an index card and says, I think we just write down ideas, and threw it in the floor. So then all the XP people pull all the index cards out of their pockets, and so they start writing. There were like 7 XP people, so had 7 people writing on cards, and the people who didn't know anything about XP go, can I have a card? So we have a pile of cards on the floor, and then somebody says, well, how do we turn that into an agenda? And somebody says, well, you notice I keep saying somebody says, we have no idea who said or did anything in the room. It was that tight, right? Yeah. Somebody says, well, I guess if you care, you make an agenda. If you don't care, you get a coffee break. So I don't care, so I took a coffee break. And I came back and things were taped on the wall, on the window, and I have no idea to this day what was there. What was interesting was about sometime later, somebody says, hey, I want to add something to agenda. How do I add something to the agenda? And somebody says, go put it in. And he looks around and goes, like this, and he walks over. I have no idea what he put in the agenda, where he put it. But you see, that kind of a meeting never happens, right? And that's why in the heart of Agile, on our coffee mug or the synopsis slide, I say increase the quality of listening. The quality, the generosity in the listening in that room was enormous. Mm-hmm. There was no fighting, ego, no criticizing, right? Even Stephen Meller never got any bad word toward him, right? And I watched Arie van Bennekom when Kent Beck was explaining XP. He didn't understand a word Kent said. He was like doing this the whole time. And I watched Kent Beck's face when Arie van Bennekom was explaining DSDM, which looks like a heavyweight methodology. Now it's a really excellent risk reduction methodology, but at that moment, And Kent, I could see his face. He was going like, but not a word came out of his mouth. So this was the magic, right? So that's how we started.
Yeah.
That's why, and that's how we started. And for me, that was the magic was, and even there's a sentence in the principles, we value whatever delivering, every couple of weeks to every couple of months. Mm-hmm. And I have a rule that says every team must deliver every 3 months. That 3 months is a magical number to me. It's a quarter in an industrial thing. You can't hold your concentration longer than 3 months. If you do 3 months, good things happen. And if it's less, it's fine, but it's not longer than. So I had written months, and Ward Cunningham, extreme programming guy, is looking really uncomfortable about this. And he says, why months? Why not weeks? So I told him, this is a critical moment. He says, would it offend you if we put weeks to months with a preference to the former? I go, no, it's perfectly fine. So we had this kind of a writing thing. So we don't know who came up with the X over Y. We went skiing and we came back and some people had been talking, and there's a moment we come back in the room and there's this X over Y, and everybody goes, that has to be how it's done, because there's no insult intended directly, right? Yeah. And then we wordsmithed it, like 17 people sitting staring at the whiteboard. Every single word in there was unanimous, right? There was no compromises. And it would go like, so what about this sentence? And then how do you feel? And then if anybody was like, even like this, they'd say, so what's bothering you? Well, I'm having trouble with it. So then they would say, well, what would it take to fix it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so literally the very end, so how does everybody read everything? And it was like all like this. And again, 17, we're all staring around going, did we really just do that? That's amazing. Yeah. So that's how it was done. And you see, when it took me a decade to deconstruct why it worked. And for me, it worked because of the generosity of the listening. So that's the why now in the heart of Agile, we say increase the quality of listening as the first thing that you do.